What's up YouTube? Welcome to another episode of Preparedness ZA, where we discuss everything prepper related, specifically towards the conditions in South Africa. This episode I'd like to discuss our neighbors Zimbabwe, what happened, how those guys survived, and what's the current status. So as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe. I'd really appreciate that, and let's get into it. Okay, so there are three key events that I would like to discuss that ultimately created the crisis in Zimbabwe, which affected all the people living there. I'm sure you can go into much more detail, but these make up the basic timeline in a nutshell, and I'll explain how one scenario has a chain reaction and become multiple factions in a that a prepper must consider. So number one. The first thing that happened was a social unrest, protests, etc. This was pre-1979, which led to the British rule to sign a peace agreement, followed by a democratic election that put Mugabe in power. A power struggle between the ZANU and ZAPU parties in 1982 led to Mugabe sending the North Korean military to demolish a ZAPU rebellion. Mugabe was accused of killing thousands of innocent civilians, and eventually in 1987 both the ZANU and ZAPU parties signed a peace agreement, who merged to become ZANU-PF. These events were ongoing for 5 years. In this time, it became near impossible to go into local towns to get general supplies. People were killed by protesting thugs, assuming you were part of the opposite position, or party rather, or were killed by the military, assuming you were part of the protesting ZAPU supporters. The second event, military clashes, invested in uncertainty, excessive printing of money and bad economic policies set out by the Zimbabwean government led to a rise in inflation, and Zimbabwe started noticing a drastic economic decline and rise in the cost of living. Inflation started to increase drastically. So between 1993 and 1999, the inflation was set at approximately 585%. Local propaganda spread trying to blame white farmers for the rise in food prices, which sparked more protests and angry Zimbabweans to head to the streets. Eventually, in 2000, a violent campaign set under the Mugabe regime forced white farmers to be illegally evicted off of their farms. They were given 30 days to vacate the property or face jail time, up to 6 years in jail. Massive amounts of squatters started killing and stealing livestock. Farmers and their families eventually could not hold off attackers, took with them what they could, and they basically moved off of their farms. Zimbabwe ignored the warnings regarding international sanctions if these policies were adopted, and in 2001 the World Bank and IMF cut aid to Zimbabwe, and by 2008 inflation was set at 79 billion %. Hyperinflation now made living in Zimbabwe a nightmare. Prices would rise every week, then every day, and eventually by the hour. The cost of living was so high that employers stopped going to work. Public transport cost more than a day's wages, and any money or assets you may have had was now worthless. Banks took ownership of your money, pensions were gone, and despite what was happening, Zimbabwe kept on printing new denomination banknotes, and by the time these new notes would reach Zimbabwe, they were worthless. Zimbabweans hit an all-time low when shops stopped accepting cash, people started bartering, and Zimbabwe started experiencing power cuts. Water would be cut off for months at a time, and people needed to live smarter to survive. So how did Zimbabweans survive? Out of the mouth of a Zimbabwean lady and how they survived, she wrote, "When the shops opened but had nothing on their shelves, it was a dark day. No bread, maize flour, cake flour, oil, there was nothing. What do? You get smart. You eat out of your garden, you swap food for food, you swap parts for food, you swap clothes for food. If I can give you any advice, the first thing I would say is withdraw your money out of the bank. Withdraw everything. Use your money to start buying supplies. Buy petrol and diesel, buy car parts, tires, water pumps and medicine. Lots and lots of medicine, especially antibiotics, painkillers, diarrhea tablets and medicine for nausea, etc. A basic medical kit is a must. Try and get 6 to 12 months supply of your chronic medication. Store goods such as domestos, maize flour, cake and bread flour and sugar. These things won't be available. And if you don't have, you will be eating vegetables only. Keep some chicken so you will have eggs. Make arrangements with your neighbors to grow different types of vegetables to what you are growing, so there is a variety. One neighbor grows potatoes, the other carrots, and the other onions, and you swap out. Have someone only grow maize, so that when you need maize flour, it can be ground down into a flour for breads. Make sure everyone's passports are ready, so that if you have to leave, you can. Get involved with the elderly. Give them food, candles, clothes, and make sure they are protected. If you have the space, grow plants with medicinal properties. Get to know your plants. Get two-way radios. The network towers will be down, and if they do work, make sure you have airtime available. Get solar panels to be able to charge your devices. Get batteries, lots and lots of batteries. Make sure you have a flashlight, because if you cannot afford to pay your electricity bill, they disconnect your electricity. Then there's the water situation. Store as much water as you possibly can in whatever you can. If you have a borehole for water, make sure you have a solar-powered water pump. But most importantly, have faith. If you do not have faith, having the above means nothing. After more than 10 years of Zimbabwe's economical fall, people are still struggling. I beg you, don't just look after yourself and your family. Form groups and look after each other. Things go bad very fast. Don't let it happen to you. So if you look at Zimbabwe and all the things that have happened there, people were not safe in the urban areas, and people were not safe in the rural areas on farms being self-sustainable. What is worrying is that we see similar things being said about South Africa. The land reform policies that the South African government want to introduce, riots, looting, mob justice, crime statistics are an all-time high. Being a farmer in South Africa is considered one of the most dangerous professions in the world. Eskom load shedding and how that affects production and food prices. We are now recently seeing water restrictions happening in certain areas, and there isn't a street corner we pass that there aren't any illegal Zimbabweans looking for a job to survive. Bugging out will only last so long. How will you and your family survive for months, not to mention years? So really sit and think about what happened to our neighbors, and learn from their experience, and most of all, take the advice and have groups, have friends. We consider preppers being, we think there aren't many preppers around us, but I think there are a lot more preppers than we think. And maybe it's time that we open up a bit and talk about the issues in South Africa and what would happen if we did face something more serious like our neighbors in Zimbabwe are facing to this day. So I hope this video helped you guys. I hope it makes us all think a little bit further, and instead of going after the normal bugging out and outdoor survival, I think let's think about something more realistic, to our neighbors, our African neighbors, who are still suffering 20 years later. So again, thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, a thumbs up would be appreciated. Please don't forget to subscribe. Take care and be prepared.